The snow fell on Seoul like a fine-drawn veil, silencing the city's roar into a muffled hum. Outside the floor-to-ceiling window of La Cime, where a single tasting menu cost more than a month's rent for most, the world was a blur of soft white. Inside, it was a cathedral of calculated perfection. Crystal glasses gleamed under recessed lighting, each one precisely 2 inches from the silver cutlery. The air was warm, scented with truffle oil and quiet wealth. Dr. Kwon Ji-hoon sat alone at a table for 2, his posture as severe and elegant as the minimalist decor surrounding him. He was not enjoying the meal, he was assessing it. The seared foie gras was competent, the wine pairing predictable. Competence and predictability were the pillars of his world, a world he had built with the steady, unerring hands of a surgeon and the cold logic of a mathematician. He observed the other patrons with a detached clinical eye. A politician celebrating a minor victory, his laughter too loud. A young couple on a first date, their awkwardness a tangible, inefficient energy. He saw them not as people, but as systems of predictable behaviors and biological impulses. Emotions to him were messy variables, statistical noise that corrupted the clean data of existence. Love was a temporary chemical imbalance. Faith, a cognitive fallacy. He trusted only what could be measured, dissected, and proven. His gaze drifted to the staff. They moved with practiced grace, their smiles a part of the uniform. Then he noticed her. She was not Korean. Her skin was the color of rich, dark soil, a stark, beautiful contrast to the pale aesthetic of the room. She was tall, slender, and moved with a quiet dignity that seemed at odds with the subservient role. But it wasn't her appearance that held his clinical attention. It was the subtle tremor in her hand as she poured water, a micro-tremor most would miss. It was the faint sheen of perspiration on her brow, expertly dabbed away when she thought no one was looking. It was the way her breath hitched, almost imperceptibly, as she turned from a table. He catalogued the symptoms: fatigue, fine motor impairment, mild diaphoresis, possible hypoglycemia, perhaps an underlying infection. He filed the diagnosis away and turned back to his perfectly plated dish. It was not his concern. A disruption in the restaurant service, nothing more. Amara felt his eyes on her. Most of the diners looked through her, but this man, he looked at her. His gaze wasn't lecherous or curious. It was analytical, like a scientist studying a specimen. It unnerved her. She pushed the feeling down, along with the fever that had been simmering in her blood for 3 days. She couldn't afford to be sick. Her scholarship covered tuition, but Seoul was an expensive city, and her dreams of being an artist required supplies, a small rooftop room to call her own, and food. So she worked. At the restaurant, at a convenience store, tutoring English. She pushed her body until it screamed, and then she pushed it further. The heat in the room was suffocating. The low murmur of conversation sounded like rushing water in her ears. She gripped her tray, the polished silver suddenly slick in her palm. The man at the corner table was still watching. His face was a mask of aristocratic indifference, but his eyes were sharp, missing nothing. She took a step, then another. The floor seemed to tilt, the crystal glasses multiplying into 1,000 shimmering points of light. A wave of blackness rolled up from the base of her skull. Her next thought was not of herself, but of the expensive plates on her tray. The sound was a desecration in the temple of quiet dining. A sharp, explosive crash of porcelain and glass, followed by a soft, heavy thud. Gasps rippled through the room. Ji-hoon didn't startle. His first emotion was a flicker of pure annoyance. The perfect, sterile silence of his evening had been violated. A variable he had observed but failed to control had just cascaded into chaos. Then instinct took over. The years of relentless training, the thousands of hours spent mastering the intricate mechanics of the human body, surged to the forefront. He was on his feet before the manager had even registered the scene. "Don't move her," he commanded, his voice cutting through the panicked whispers. It was the voice he used in the operating theater, calm, absolute, leaving no room for argument. He knelt beside her. The scent of spilled wine and perfume filled the air. Her uniform was disheveled, her face pale beneath its dark complexion. He pressed 2 fingers to her neck, finding the carotid artery. The pulse was rapid, thready, weak. He tilted her head back, checking her airway. "Someone call 1119, he said to the hovering manager, not looking up. "Tell them it's a syncopal episode, suspected sepsis, female mid-20s. He was a machine of efficiency. He noted her shallow breathing, the feverish heat radiating from her skin. He was Dr. Kwon Ji-hoon, Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery at Semyong Medical Center. This was a simple problem, a biological equation to be solved. But as he looked down at her unconscious face, at the vulnerability in the curve of her cheek, a different kind of variable entered the equation. It was foreign, unquantifiable. For a fraction of a second, the physician was gone, and there was only a man kneeling on a floor of shattered porcelain, looking at a fallen stranger in a silent, snow-filled city. The ambulance arrived with a quiet efficiency that pleased Ji-hoon. He gave the paramedics a clipped, precise summary of his observations, his authority unquestioned. As they loaded her onto the gurney, a thought, illogical and intrusive, entered his mind. He couldn't just let them take her to the nearest municipal hospital. The care would be adequate, but not optimal, not perfect. He produced his hospital ID. "Take her to Semyong Medical Center," he instructed the paramedic. "Admit her, under my authority." The man's eyes widened slightly in recognition of the name and the institution, and he nodded without question. Ji-hoon followed in his own car, the silent glide of the luxury sedan, a stark contrast to the wailing urgency of the ambulance ahead. He drove through the snow-dusted streets of Gangnam, his knuckles white on the leather steering wheel. Why was he doing this? The question echoed in the sterile quiet of his car. Duty. His duty had ended when the paramedics arrived. Pride, perhaps? He had intervened. He now felt a perverse sense of ownership over the outcome. It was, he reasoned, an unsolved problem. He couldn't simply walk away from an equation midway through its calculation. It was a matter of intellectual tidiness. At the hospital, the familiar antiseptic smell of his domain calmed him. He bypassed the usual channels, his presence clearing a path through the organized chaos of the emergency room. He spoke to the attending physician, a young resident who was visibly intimidated. "Severe pneumonia, complicated by dehydration and malnutrition," the resident reported, looking at the chart. "We've started her on broad-spectrum antibiotics and IV fluids." A simple textbook case, utterly beneath his notice. He should have been on his way home to his minimalist penthouse, to his silent collection of rare medical journals. Yet he found himself walking towards the private room he had arranged for her. He stood outside the door for a long moment, watching her through the small glass window. She looked small in the large hospital bed, dwarfed by the machinery that monitored her every breath, every heartbeat. The steady, rhythmic beep of the cardiac monitor was a familiar comfort. It was a language he understood. Data, predictable. He entered the room. A nurse was adjusting the IV drip. She bowed her head respectfully. "Chief Kwan." He gave a curt nod, his eyes fixed on the patient. Her few belongings were in a clear plastic bag on the bedside table. A worn purse, a cracked smartphone, a student ID card for a local university. Amara Jones, major, fine arts. He picked up the purse. It felt flimsy, the cheap material a world away from the bespoke leather goods he was accustomed to. Inside there was no wallet, just a few crumpled bills, a transportation card, and a single key attached to a faded, hand-woven keychain. No emergency contacts, no family. A profound sense of isolation emanated from the small collection of objects. Alone, the word hung in the sterile air of the room. He was still standing there when her eyelids fluttered open. Her eyes, a deep, liquid brown, were clouded with confusion. They scanned the room, the white walls, the IV pole, the beeping machines, before they landed on him. Recognition flickered, followed by fear. "Where?" Her voice was a dry whisper. "Where am I?" "You are at Semyong Medical Center," he stated, his tone flat, clinical. "You collapsed." Her eyes widened. The fear sharpened into panic. She tried to sit up, a move that ended in a weak, rattling cough. "The restaurant, my job, I have to go back." "Your employment is not a priority," he said, the statement a simple, logical fact. "Your priority is physiological stabilization." She stared at him, her brow furrowed, trying to process his words. Then a more pressing, terrifying reality dawned on her. "A hospital like this, I can't afford this. Please." Her voice cracked. "I have to leave." Ji-hoon felt that same flicker of annoyance he'd felt in the restaurant. Her concerns were illogical. Survival was the primary objective. Financial considerations were secondary. "The cost of your care is not your concern at present," he said, his voice colder than he intended. "Your concern is breathing. Focus on that. It is a simple enough task." Without another word, he turned and left the room, the door swinging shut behind him with a soft hiss. He walked down the polished corridor, the sound of his expensive shoes echoing in the silence. He had solved the immediate problem. She was safe. She was being treated. He had tidied up the messy variable. But as he stepped out into the cold night air, the snow still falling, he felt a profound sense of disquiet. He had answered her panic with logic, her fear with facts. And in doing so, he had offered no comfort at all. He had left a stranger more alone than he had found her. The thought was illogical, inefficient, and it followed him all the way home. Dr. Kwon Ji-hoon's world began to fray at the edges. His surgical precision remained flawless, his hands moving with the same steady, unemotional grace within the sanctum of the operating theater. But outside of it, his focus wavered. During a board meeting, while his father, Chairman Kwon, was outlining third-quarter profit projections, Ji-hoon found his mind drifting to a rooftop apartment he had never seen, to a sketchbook filled with drawings he could only imagine. The woman, Amara Jones, had become an anomaly in his carefully curated life, a persistent, low-grade fever in his own system. He couldn't stop thinking about her. He told himself it was professional follow-up, a physician's responsibility to see a case through. He dispatched his ever-loyal assistant, Mr. Choi, to discreetly gather information. The report was concise and bleak. Amara Jones, age 24, full scholarship student at Hongik University, orphaned. Came to Korea from a small town in Ohio to study art, a dream funded by years of working menial jobs. Her visa was tied to her student status. She worked 3 jobs to cover her living expenses, sending what little she had left to a foster sibling back home. She was, in every measurable way, utterly alone. The word echoed again, this time with more force. It dredged up a memory he had long since buried under layers of ambition and clinical detachment. He was 10 years old. A car accident on a rainy night. He had been in the back seat. He remembered the screech of tires, the smell of burnt rubber, and his mother's perfume. Afterwards, he was placed in a hospital room, not unlike the one Amara now occupied. His arm was in a cast. His parents were physically unharmed, but emotionally shattered by the loss of his younger sister, who had been sitting beside him. They visited his room, but they weren't there. Their gazes were distant, their touches brief and distracted. They grieved in a cold, silent vacuum, and they taught him, in that silence, that emotion was a catastrophic failure of the system. Grief was a disease. Love was a vulnerability. Logic, control, perfection. Those were the only antiseptics against the chaos of feeling. He had been a little boy, alone in a sterile white room, learning to be a machine. He shook the memory away, annoyed by its intrusion. He had a consultation, a complex aortic valve replacement. He should be reviewing the patient's angiogram, not contemplating the socioeconomic struggles of a foreign waitress. Yet that evening he found himself outside her hospital room once more. He hesitated, his hand on the door. What was he doing here? What did he hope to achieve? He had no answers, only a strange compulsion he could neither name nor ignore. He went in. She was awake, propped up against the pillows, a sketchbook resting on her knees. The harsh hospital lighting softened the angles of her face, revealing a weariness that went deeper than her illness. She was drawing the view from her window, the dense tapestry of Seoul's skyline at dusk. In her sketch, the cold, impersonal buildings seemed to breathe with a life he had never noticed. "You are feeling better," he stated. It wasn't a question. Her eyes met his. The fear was gone, replaced by a wary curiosity. "Yes, doctor, thank you for everything. The antibiotics are effective. Your inflammatory markers are down," he said, defaulting to the familiar language of medicine. She gave a small, tired smile. "I'm glad my markers are cooperating." There was a gentle irony in her tone that pricked at his composure. He gestured towards the untouched tray of hospital food on her table. It was from the VIP menu, a selection he had personally ordered. "You are not eating. Adequate nutrition is essential for recovery." "It's very kind," she said, choosing her words carefully. "But I think my body is craving something a little less perfect. I miss kimchi stew from the stall near my apartment." The contrast was jarring, his world of sterile perfection against her world of humble, flavorful life. His father found him later that week, reviewing charts in his office. Chairman Kwan was a man carved from the same cold stone as his son, only with sharper edges. "Ji-hoon," he began without preamble. "I've reviewed the billing reports. You've assigned a private suite and comprehensive care to a non-paying patient, a foreigner." "She was a medical emergency that occurred in my presence," Ji-hoon replied, his eyes not leaving the chart. "I assumed responsibility." "This is not a charity," his father said, his voice like chipping ice. "It is a business. What is this woman to you? Your sentimentality is a liability to this hospital, to our family's name. End it." The command was absolute. And in that moment, something shifted in Ji-hoon. For years, he had operated within the rigid system his father had created. He had pursued perfection to earn an approval that was never offered, only implied by the absence of criticism. But now, this cold dismissal of a human life, this reduction of a person to a line item on a balance sheet, felt wrong. The logic of it was sound from a business perspective, but it was a logic that felt hollow, empty. It was the same hollow logic that had left a 10-year-old boy alone in a hospital room. He looked up, meeting his father's gaze for the first time. "She is my patient," he said, his voice quiet but unyielding, "and I will not end it." The defiance was a foreign, exhilarating sensation. It was not logical, it was not efficient, but it was his. Amara was discharged on a crisp, clear afternoon. The air had the clean, sharp bite of impending winter. Ji-hoon was waiting for her at the hospital entrance, the engine of his black sedan humming silently. He told himself it was a final medical follow-up, a physician ensuring a patient's safe transition home. It was a flimsy pretext, and the skeptical look the discharged nurse gave him confirmed it. The drive to her neighborhood was a journey across invisible borders, from the polished, affluent streets of Gangnam to the winding, narrow alleys of a working-class area north of the river. He navigated the car through streets barely wide enough for one vehicle, his pristine German machine looking alien and out of place. He parked at the bottom of a steep hill. "I live up there," she said, pointing to a flight of concrete steps that seemed to ascend into the sky. Her building was old, its facade cracked and water-stained. He took her bag without a word and followed her up the stairs. He counted 73 steps. With each one, he felt as if he were climbing further away from his own life. Her apartment was on the roof, a small, illegally constructed room, more of a shed than a home. He had anticipated poverty, but he was not prepared for this. Yet when she unlocked the door and stepped inside, the space was not what he expected. It was tiny, cluttered, and poorly insulated. But it was immaculately clean and filled with a stubborn, vibrant life. Her drawings were taped to every available wall space, transforming the cracked plaster into a gallery of faces, cityscapes, and abstract bursts of color. A row of small, thriving plants sat on the single windowsill, their green leaves reaching for the sunlight. The air smelled of old paper, turpentine, and something warm and spicy, like cinnamon. It was the complete antithesis of his own home, a vast, empty penthouse of glass and steel, decorated in shades of gray, where the only signs of life were the orchids his housekeeper replaced every Monday. He set her bag down, feeling large and clumsy in the small space. "You should rest," he said, his voice sounding unnaturally loud. "I will have a care package sent, nutritious food, a space heater." "You don't have to do that, doctor," she said softly. "You've already done more than enough." He began visiting, once a week at first, then twice. He used the excuse of checking her breathing, monitoring her recovery. He brought bags of groceries filled with expensive, organic produce she didn't know how to cook. She, in turn, would make him tea, a simple barley tea served in a chipped mug. They would sit in the cramped room, a strange and silent pair. He would ask about her symptoms. She would tell him about her art classes. He spoke of medical certainties. She spoke of the way light changed on the Han River at dawn. He was drawn to her, to the quiet resilience that seemed to radiate from her like warmth from a stove. He was drawn to the way she found beauty in the cracked pavement and the rusting water towers of her neighborhood, things he had never even noticed. One evening, a sudden downpour trapped him there. The rain hammered on the thin metal roof, a deafening but strangely intimate sound. The power flickered and died, plunging the room into near darkness, lit only by the neon glow of the city filtering through the rain-streaked window. She lit a candle, its small flame casting dancing shadows on the walls. "I'm sorry," she said. "The wiring isn't very reliable." "It's fine," he replied, his voice a low murmur in the dark. In the flickering light, he saw a thin, white scar cutting across the back of her hand, an old injury. Without thinking, he reached out and gently touched it. His fingers, which could dissect and suture the most delicate of human tissues, felt clumsy against her skin. "How did this happen?" he asked. "She didn't pull away?" "A stupid accident when I was a kid. I was working in a kitchen, washing dishes. A broken glass. I didn't have money for stitches, so my foster mom just taped it up." She told the story without a trace of self-pity, as if it were simply a fact of her life, like her eye color or her height. The casual acceptance of a hardship he couldn't even imagine struck him with the force of a physical blow. He thought of his own childhood, protected, privileged, yet emotionally sterile. He had been given everything, yet she, who had nothing, possessed a richness of spirit that he fundamentally lacked. In the candlelit intimacy of the small room, with the rain drumming a relentless rhythm overhead, the walls he had spent a lifetime building began to crumble. A confession escaped him, a whispered truth he had never spoken aloud to another living soul. "Perfection," he said, his voice barely audible, "over the storm is a very cold, very empty room." He expected her to offer some empty platitude, some word of pity. She did not. She simply looked at him, her gaze clear and steady in the candlelight. After a long moment, she turned her head and looked towards the window, where the rain traced shimmering paths down the glass. "Maybe," she said softly, "but even cold rooms have windows." He followed her gaze. Outside, the rain-lashed city was a kaleidoscope of blurred, beautiful light. For the first time, he didn't see a grid of streets and a collection of buildings. He saw a million windows, and behind each one, a million stories. He saw a world not of data and systems, but of messy, chaotic, interconnected humanity. And in that moment, he felt the first, terrifying thaw of a heart that had been frozen for a very long time. The thaw was not a gentle spring melt. It was a violent cracking of ice, painful and disorienting. Ji-hoon found himself living a dual existence. In the hospital, he was still the infallible Dr. Kwon, his authority absolute, his emotions a tightly guarded fortress. But the moments spent in Amara's rooftop room were changing his internal landscape. He started to see the world through a different lens. He noticed the exhaustion in a junior nurse's eyes, the fear in the hand of a patient spouse. These were details he had previously dismissed as irrelevant noise. Now they registered as vital signs of a shared humanity. His new perspective did not go unnoticed. His father's disapproval became a palpable force, a cold pressure in every interaction. "You are distracted, Ji-hoon," Chairman Kwon said one afternoon, cornering him in the hospital's sterile, glass-walled walkway. "You were 10 minutes late for your morning rounds. That is not perfection. This association with that foreign woman is corrupting your discipline. Ji-hoon met his father's cold stare. It is not an association, and it is not corrupting me. It is, he faltered, unable to find the right word. What was it? He didn't have the vocabulary for this new, unquantifiable feeling. It was illogical, inefficient, and yet it felt more real than any diagnosis he had ever made. The rumors started soon after. A jealous colleague, Dr. Park, whom Ji-hoon had beaten out for the chief of surgery position, began whispering in the hospital corridors. The whispers were venomous and calculated. Dr. Kwon, the great perfectionist, was slumming it with a charity case, a foreign waitress. His judgment was compromised. Was he even fit to hold his position? The gossip spread like a contagion, tainting the respect he had always commanded. He ignored it, telling himself that his work would speak for itself. But the words were like acid, slowly eating away at the foundations of his professional life. The true crisis came on a Tuesday. He received a frantic call from Amara. Her voice was weak, breathless. I can't breathe." He broke every traffic law getting to her apartment. He found her on the floor, gasping for air, her lips tinged with blue. He carried her out of the building and, to his car, his mind racing, cataloging the terrifying symptoms. At the hospital, the diagnosis was swift and devastating. The pneumonia had inflicted more damage than they realized, exacerbating a latent congenital heart defect, a patent foramen oval that was now causing severe complications. Her heart was failing. She needed surgery, a complex high-risk open heart procedure, his specialty. It was the kind of surgical challenge he once would have relished, a complex machine to be repaired. But looking at her lying in the ICU bed, pale and still, all he felt was a soul-crushing fear. This was not a machine. This was Amara. His father summoned him to his office. The room was opulent and cold, overlooking the entire city. "I am forbidding you from performing this surgery," Chairman Kwon said, his voice devoid of all emotion. "It is too high risk. The patient is unstable. If she dies on your table, the rumors Dr. Park has so helpfully cultivated will become fact. Your career, the reputation of this hospital, everything I have built, will be jeopardized. Let Dr. Park handle it. She is not your responsibility." Every word was a perfectly logical, calculated truth. The risk to his career was immense. The probability of a negative outcome was statistically significant. The logical choice, the perfect choice, was to step away, to protect himself, to protect the system. It was the choice the 10-year-old boy in the hospital room had made, to wall himself off from the pain of vulnerability. But he was not that boy anymore. He looked at his father, at the man who had taught him that love was a liability and emotion was a weakness. He saw not a powerful chairman, but a man trapped in his own cold, empty room. "Responsibility is not a calculation," Ji-hoon said, his voice shaking with a force he didn't know he possessed. "It is a choice. Humanity is not a variable to be controlled or a liability to be managed. It is the entire point. I will do the surgery." He walked out of the office, leaving his father speechless for the first time in his life. He was choosing her over his career, over his family's legacy, over the entire logical framework of his existence. It was the most irrational decision he had ever made, and the most necessary. The operating theater was his sanctuary, a world of pure, focused order. But this time it felt different. As he scrubbed in, the familiar ritual felt heavier, more sacred. Looking through the glass at his team preparing the room, he saw not subordinates, but people trusting him. When he entered, a hush fell over the room. He walked to the operating table. Amara was draped in sterile blue sheets, only the area of the incision exposed. But he didn't see a surgical field. He saw her face in his mind, her smile, the way she looked at the rain-streaked city from her window. He took the scalpel. His hand was steady. As he made the first incision, he whispered a phrase, a mantra. Breathe, just breathe. He was saying it to her, to the anesthesiologist, to the heart-lung machine, and most of all, to himself. Hours passed. The room was a symphony of beeping monitors, quiet instructions, and the soft metallic click of instruments. He worked not like a machine, but like an artist, his hands moving with an intuitive grace that went beyond mere technical skill. He was repairing the flawed, beautiful, resilient heart of the woman who had shown him his own. Finally, it was done. The most difficult procedure of his life. He stepped back from the table, his body aching, his scrubs soaked through. The monitor displayed a steady, strong rhythm, a perfect rhythm. But this time the perfection was not cold, it was warm, it was life. Weeks later, snow was falling again. It wasn't a blinding storm, but a soft, gentle descent of white flakes. It coated the city, not in a shroud of isolation, but in a blanket of peace. Ji-hoon sat in a chair by Amara's bedside. She was out of the ICU, recovering in the same private room where he had first spoken to her. The beeping machines were gone. The only sound was her soft, even breathing. He watched her sleep, the afternoon light casting a warm glow on her face. He reached out and took her hand. Her skin was warm. Her fingers curled instinctively around his. It was a simple connection, a circuit of warmth and trust. Her eyelids fluttered open. She looked at him, her eyes clear and bright. A slow smile spread across her face. "You look tired, doctor," she whispered, her voice still a little weak. He looked at their joined hands, then back at her face. The title, doctor, felt like a costume he was finally ready to shed. The cold logic, the sterile perfection, the fortress of indifference, he let it all fall away. All that was left was the man, the human being she had helped him find again. "Ji-hoon," he said, his voice soft, full of a feeling he could finally name. "My name is Ji-hoon." The snow continued to fall outside the window, blanketing the world in a clean, quiet hope.